little bit more time here. We're going to go ahead and get started a little bit early so I can cover some housekeeping issues. My name is Amy Miller, and I am a national trainer with Teachers Curriculum Institute, and I am also in the classroom. I have spent 30 out of the 31 past years teaching middle school social studies, and I am really excited to share the top 10 activities for ancient world history. And a couple of housekeeping issues. We have um, a Q&A button to respond and share your questions. I'm going to be joined by a colleague of mine in just a moment to help me manage that. For those of you that are needing closed captioning, make sure you turn that on, and the chat. It is more fun to share. So thank you already for those of you who have shared your location. I see we are represented all the way from Florida to Anchorage, Alaska. And with that, what we are going to be covering, we're going to be talking about the top 10 hands-on classroom activities in History Alive, the Ancient World. However, I do want you all to know that these lessons are also available in the World Through 1750, our TCI book that is the World Through 1750. These lessons are also found in there. I chose these lessons because they're connected to other lessons in the unit and the curriculum and will build a solid historical foundation for your students going into high school. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about how you can process this information as a teacher during your summer break, how you can use it to plan lessons for next year, and then how you will receive support every step of the way. Well, we're going to experience a TCI lesson here in just a moment, but first, I want to take you into these top 10. So the first one is investigating the past through inquiry. And that is one of the very first lessons in this program. What happens is we set the stage for the entire school year with your students, and your students will learn how to investigate the past by taking on the roles of a geographer, a historian, and an archaeologist. And they investigate artifacts that they have found, cave paintings and tools and objects that have been created. And they look at it through a historical lens and the role of the geographer, archaeologist, and historian. They make a prediction on what they think the artifact is and what it means. And then they go into the history book and they read what actual social scientists have to say about those items. So it's a great lesson to set the stage for the school year. And you'll also see that there are other lessons on this list of top 10 that are not bolded. And the not bolded just means I think they're great. They're incredible hands-on lessons, but because we have a limited amount of time together today, I'm really going to just be covering the ones that are bolded. And I'm going to start with ancient Sumer. This lesson is amazing. One of the reasons why this lesson is so cool is we get to analyze artifacts from ancient Sumer. And TCI provides you with the images that the artifacts of the students that are going to be studying them. And they're looking for examples of the characteristics of civilization. And then they determine whether or not historians should classify ancient Sumer as a civilization and why they do. And they justify it based on evidence. So if you'll see, we have some objectives for social studies here, but also you're going to see a lot of ELA things in here too, like explaining and identifying and justification. So they're going to learn about the characteristics of civilization and determine whether ancient Sumer had each characteristic of civilization by analyzing and drawing conclusions from artifacts unearthed by archaeology. One of the things that I absolutely love about this lesson is we're going to go into this and I'm going to show you a couple of things. One is the preview for this lesson is brilliant. We get the kids started on what they think civilization means. What do you think it means to be highly developed? What does that look like to you in your life? And so you're giving your students an authentic starting point into the lesson. And then they go through this lesson and they find that people may have different opinions about what it means to be developed, but historians use specific characteristics. And as they go through this, they first learn about the characteristics of civilization, and then they're going to play a game with their shoulder partner, and they're going to do gallery walks around the room and look for that characteristic of civilization, those artifacts, and where they fit into civilization and as justification for why Sumer is a civilization. We start by them learning about the characteristics of civilization using a graphically organized note. And then they get to do something really fun. They get to roll one of the dice to determine which characteristic of civilization they should learn about next. And then you'll see, based on the image that you're looking at, they're working with their partners. They go and they visit the placard. They read about their section. They learn about the different characteristics. And then we get back to it at the end. They look and they play this game called Last Pair Standing. And last pair standing is a game where they stand um, if they can justify that that artifact is a characteristic of a civilization in ancient Sumer. Now, one of the great parts about this lesson, as I mentioned earlier, that some of these lessons build on each other. And ancient Sumer's lesson sets the foundation for kids learning about civilizations throughout the course of the curriculum and the school year. You can use that graphically organized reading page to take a look at other civilizations that you study throughout the course of the year. You can use that graphically organized note page to look at characteristics of civilization in today's society. The best part about this is at the very end of this lesson, the kids can come back in and now they have a more refined version of what a civilization is. And they obviously justify it through evidence they found in Sumer, but now they can go back to that preview where they said what it means to be highly developed, and they can then use that to give their newly refined definition of what a civilization looks like. So in that sense, it's just brilliant. The next lesson that I want to highlight for you has to do with ancient Egypt and the Egyptian pharaohs. Now, this lesson is one of my students' favorite lessons. What we get to do in this lesson is we get to travel down the Nile River. We're going to visit monuments along the Nile River to learn about four ancient Egyptian pharaohs and their important accomplishments. I really like this lesson for a couple of reasons. We're not just looking at famous people in history, we're looking at their accomplishments. And so when we take a look at the preview for this, again, we're going to start at the place where the kids have some recognition and can build from there. And so we look at this image of Abraham Lincoln. And we look at it and we're like, why do you think they made this monument? In whose honor? And then we all get to the point where, like, yes, it's Abraham Lincoln. And then the question is why? When we build monuments for people, what have they accomplished to justify why that has been built? And so this lesson starts with something very close to home, Abraham Lincoln, and then we take that academic bridge into ancient Egypt. And we tell them, yes, great monuments such as pyramids and temples were also built to honor the pharaohs and commemorate their accomplishments. This lesson is great because the kids are going to hop into a felucca. They're going to travel down the Nile River. They get to hear from their tour guide. They get to get off of their felucca and go visit these monuments. And then here's the image I'm sharing with you about the felucca. They get to sit down in their assigned place. I love that. And let's just hear a clip from our tour guide that helps us with on our felucca.
Ahlan wa sahlan. Hello. Today we will be touring the monuments of ancient Egypt. We will focus on three important periods of ancient Egyptian history and the accomplishments of four of Egypt's greatest pharaohs.
All right. So then we have our tour guide teachers. One of the greatest parts about this lesson is then you get to be the guide on the side. You're just going to facilitate the lesson because we now have a tour guide that's going to take our students on a journey through ancient Egypt and along the Nile River. There is some geography associated with this lesson as well as some basic historical background. And then our first site is Giza. I also want to point out that this is a great opportunity. TCI is very diverse in their perspectives and how they represent that. And so with this lesson, yes, we look at the leaders. Yes, we look at their accomplishments. We also look at who is actually building these monuments because it was not actually the pharaoh themselves. There were lots of workers that did that work for them. So this starts them to think about the social structure in ancient Egypt, which then gets built on in the next lesson in Egypt, which has to do with the social structure. But back to ancient Egypt and Giza. So they're going to hypothesize how they think this pyramid was built. And so they get to sit in with their partner and they talk about which of these hypotheses is accurate. Whether they cut the blocks and move them, or they created the blocks on site, or extraterrestrials built the Great Pyramid or gave it. So they create their hypothesis, and then, in similar to the very first lesson in our curriculum, investigating the past, they create their idea together, and then they go back into the text and they read what historians think really happened. So they're going to hear what historians say and they believe how the pyramid was built. And not to give you a little spoiler alert, but if you're about the age of 45 up, we learned in school a different way of how the pyramids were built and what historians think how they built the pyramid today. Next up, they go on an adventure down the Nile and they learn about Karnak, the White Chapel that was built at Karnak, and they learn about culture and the arts. And then they go into Hatshepsut, one of the first female pharaohs, and then finally Ramses II. All along this path, one of the great things about this is that they are writing letters or postcards home to someone that they feel is they want to talk to about. So write a postcard to a friend or relative. They're going to write a postcard um, along each stop, and then at the very end of the lesson, they're going to write a letter about ancient Egypt and their journey. The great part about this is that we've given them an authentic experience in our classrooms. They've practiced writing. We've talked to them about what the postcard should have. And then they're going to use that structure to write a letter about what they learned while traveling along the Nile River. So there's a lot of writing in this lesson, and it's done in a very structured way to help our students be successful. It also sets the stage for them looking at leaders in history, not just for being famous, but for what they accomplished. And that is one of the reasons why it's on my top 10 of all time. Another lesson I want to highlight with you goes into ancient China. This one is not bolded in my list of top 10. However, I do want to highlight this one because the first emperor of China, Emperor Qin, talking about leaders, this is another activity where they evaluate the role of a leader, Emperor Qin, and they debate the effectiveness of his efforts to unify ancient China. And what they learn in this lesson is that, yes, he may have been effective, but he was also quite a brutal leader. So it is a great lesson on leadership, how to look at leaders, evaluate them on effectiveness, and also how they enact that change or implement those changes in their society. It's a great foundational lesson about leadership, and it's about ancient world, but they can make those connections as they move forward. Probably Well, not just top 10 in the ancient world, but top 10 lessons um, in our middle school curriculum for me personally is this lesson on um, the rise of democracy in Greece. Researchers have told us the incredible connection that young adolescents have with music. And TCI ties that in beautifully with this lesson on the forms of government. So the students in this lesson are going to learn about four forms of government. We start with something very close to them. They're on a sports team and they're one play away from winning a game. Which option do they think is best? And then option A, B, C, and D, whichever they choose, connects to one of the forms of government that they're going to learn about. So in this lesson, they're going to choose the music they listen to based on the different forms of government that were um, in evidence in ancient Greece. So we first start with listening to some of our favorite songs using a monarch. And a monarch is chosen and picks the music and has an heir to the throne. And the monarch can choose to listen to some people, but most people's voices are left out of that. Now, this experiential exercise is great. We get the kids up, their emotions are flying, they're feeling unheard because the monarch did not ask them what they thought. Then they realize there's an oligarchy, and yes, there are a few people now, maybe our voices will be heard, but the majority will not. And then they rise to overthrow with and create a tyranny. And again, it creates a little bit of discomfort in the room because the tyrant keeps changing, and very few people end up being happy with the music at the end. And then finally, we get to a democracy in which everyone has a vote. The best part about this lesson is that then the kids are going to go back and they're going to say, well, let's take a look at what these different forms of government, what each one was good at, and then maybe some others had some good parts, but at the same time, they didn't really represent all of us. So, yes, the democracy, we all had a say in the government. However, it did take us a while. So, this processing activity is really smartly placed because we want them to evaluate the four forms of government that were practiced in Greece. We want them to give them grades. Also, though, we want them to identify that, yes, a monarch makes very efficient decisions, but it did not give equality to all people. And depending on the monarch, different groups of people had their needs met. And when they start to look at these forms of government um, in isolation of each other and not compared to a democracy, perhaps, then they really start identifying why a democracy is important to us, not just because we have a democracy in our country, but because of giving equality to all people and being more apt to meet the needs of the people. And the music in this lesson just really brings it home. The kids are actively engaged. They're all in the entire time. They walk away remembering this lesson for years and years to come. I have students that are 30 years and older now who still will come back and say that this is one of their favorite lessons and one of the only lessons, honestly, that they remember because they had their hands on in it and they experienced that, and also just brilliant planning by incorporating music into making choices and everybody wanting an equal voice. With that being said, I'm going to move on down the line to a couple of lessons that I also think are incredibly important. Um, One of the lessons is the golden age of Athens. And with the golden age of Athens, they learn about cultural achievements. And so, what I have learned through the course of my time teaching is that kids are obsessed with mythology when they're in middle school. And so, this lesson has a section of it. They get to travel through Athens, and this lesson allows them to to pretend like they are in the Olympics, to pretend like they are visiting an oracle, to pretend like they are in a theater. They really get to experience some of those components. But this really gives them that mythological um, set that the kids really, really enjoy. Another top 10 is the legacy of ancient Greece. Partly because while I really like this activity and it does a great job of seeing how Greece contributed to the modern world, I feel like it truly is essential for kids to have this lesson under their belt so that they can go on into their future social studies classrooms and have the foundation on what we took from ancient Greece to be a part of our society and and Western civilization in general. So I'm not really going to take you into this lesson. It is hands-on, it is active. The point is though is that it's a, I say this lesson is essential for moving forward when we're teaching social studies in the middle school because a lot of our Western world is based on ancient ancient Greece. Again, it's really tough to choose some of these lessons, but I'm going to go back in now and I'm going to go over a couple of the lessons in Rome. And instead of taking you into the lesson, I've pulled some screenshots for you. So I'm going to I'm going to fast forward through a couple of these slides because I kept you in there live. And let me move this up. Um, Rome. Alrighty, so this lesson in Rome, from Republic to Empire, really asks kids to analyze and evaluate Roman expansion because they're going to look at Roman expansion and they're also going to have to look at the opportunity cost of that and who gained and who lost each time Rome expanded. And so they are going to get the historical summarization of the major events in Roman expansion. They're going to explain the role of Julius Caesar and Octavian. We've got some geographic boundaries that we're going to map, but really the heart of this and the higher level thinking is for them to evaluate the positive and negative effects of military expansion on Roman society and economic growth. And if you look at that one particular standard or objective rather, think about how that could play out as students navigate United States history, world history in the modern times, imperialism. This really is an essential lesson to give our middle schoolers the foundations that they need to build upon in later classes. Because with every expansion, whether it involves the military or not, there are going to be positive and negative effects. The next part about this, though, is the activity that's involved. They create commemorative columns about four key periods of growth in the Roman Empire. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So we're going to put the children into groups of four, and we're going to give them each a topic of Rome's expansion to learn about so that they can become experts in that one particular expansion time period. And those are displayed for you. This is a problem-solving group work. And so for those of you that have worked with TCI materials, you're aware that we have handouts that assign roles for the students. And for those of you that are new to TCI, this is one of the things that sets us apart from other group work, if you we can use that term. Our problem-solving group work is we give a higher level thinking problem to a small group of students, and they are assigned roles: historian, editor, sculptor, and engineer for this particular assignment that they're given. There are different roles that get assigned for different TCI lessons based on what the activity is and the what we're asking them to do. But in this particular one, these are the roles that are needed. And at each step of the way, the students are going to be the leader for the different steps of the activity. So in this particular lesson, they're going to learn about the topic that we assign to them, and the historian leads the group in reading about that particular time, Roman expansion time period. And you'll see we have some geographic connections here. And then they find out more about the important events, people, and key developments. What they're going to do next is the editor is going to give each group member a blank piece of paper, and they have to turn the paper vertically like a column. Think about the columns from ancient Greece and then Rome. They write a simple inscription on the bottom of the paper that describes a key event or development in their assigned period of Roman expansion. Then they're going to put their pieces together. I love this as an example of an illustration. They're going to put their papers together to create this Roman column. Now, this also ties into some historical information about how Romans used to inscribe on their columns their achievements. But you know what else used to happen is people used to graffiti their complaints about government on these columns. So we're going to get to that in just one moment. So they create their column, they're going to display it, they're going to add some color, some creative touches. And then, whoops, sorry. Then I apologize for that. Then they're going to display it, and people are going to come up, and people who had the downside of that opportunity cost, those people in society who were minimalized by the Roman expansion, have an opportunity then to come up and graffiti on that column. And so then we're giving students an opportunity to look at who advanced during that period of expansion and then who lost out because of that period of expansion. So the next lesson that is we have a little bit more time, so I'm happy that we get to do this. But the next part about this is that at the very end of this curriculum is that we learn that Rome's expansion, the final opportunity cost for them is that they are unable to defend their borders and their leadership has become corrupt. And so the final lesson in this TCI ancient world curriculum is that the kids are going to learn about why Rome fell. And I'm going to get out of this presentation and go into that one for you. So you can see how this whole yearly curriculum ties together. The beginning of the legacy of the Roman Empire in the modern world starts with students learning about why Rome fell. And then they go into how Rome affected and influenced our own country and our modern society, not just our country, but around the world. And we want to know to what extent. So children are going to put themselves on a spectrum. To what extent ancient Rome influenced us today? And in TCI perfect fashion, we have this activity and they play a fast-paced game called Rome to Home. And in each round, they'll read about an aspect of Roman culture, such as art or language, and then they earn points by finding examples of magazines that show how that aspect of Roman culture is found in modern life. And then, as I mentioned, we use this graphically organized page to learn about the cracks in the Roman Empire. And then they start to build their game, Rome to Home. And so you'll see we start with Rome and we end up at home. So when we take a look comprehensively at the ancient world curriculum, and I'm going to focus now just on the ancient world curriculum as opposed to the world through 1750. If we look at how these lessons tie together, you will see that we start the year by investigating the past through inquiry. And we're setting the stage for children to take on the role of geographer, historian, and archaeologist because we want them to look at the ancient world through those lenses so that they can see the accomplishments, the beauty of the ancient world, the artifacts that remain, how cherished and valuable they are, which is also, although I didn't highlight it in the lessons, is also a part of this curriculum. And I'll take you into one of those in a moment to expand on that. But they really will see and engage in the beauty of the ancient world, and then also give them the foundations that they need to be successful in their future social studies classes. Now, these other lessons that are in the curriculum are all engaging. They're all hands-on. I personally chose to take the ones that were most meaningful with thinking about the students that are in our classrooms, the time, because I know that we are all, I think if you, time is a non-renewable resource, it's limited. And so we sometimes need to pick and choose. And luckily, TCI has so many flexible lesson options for us. We are so fortunate for that. However, for the top 10, you really want to plan the hands-on activities for those because they will benefit your students moving on. Um, Going back to the ancient Sumer and the characteristics of civilization, if you look at different civilizations, you can still grab that graphically organized page with the spoke wheel diagram to take a look at ancient Persia. You can use it to take a look at ancient China. You can look at different civilizations throughout the history of time. You could even use that to see how civilized is your school. Kids, kids really enjoyed that as well to see if they saw evidence of civilization in their middle school. So that one is, especially since it's at the beginning of the year, is really neat to see how that can grow its own legs and just carry itself throughout the year. Um, Again, the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, such an important lesson to help students understand leadership and looking at leaders not for being popular. And I will say, like King Tut, and because we found his tomb with all of these treasures, and we learned so much about the ancient world, but King Tut maybe himself didn't have as many accomplishments as others. We can debate that. At the same time, this lesson thinks about the leaders and what they accomplished. And that's an important lens for kids to learn about leadership through is the accomplishments of leaders. And then moving into, and you'll notice that that I was without including any of the religious lessons in my top 10. It doesn't mean that those lessons are not important. They absolutely are hands-on. It's just I'm looking ahead also at um, historical perspectives in other areas. And you'll notice that I focused a lot on leadership today because these lessons have lots of opportunities to discuss the effectiveness and the accomplishments and the methods of leadership. The geography lessons are important as well. But you'll notice that when I went through the lessons, pretty much all of them had a geographic component that you can incorporate into that lesson as well. So it's not to avoid the geography lessons in this curriculum. It's just to highlight that they are also available within the lessons themselves. We really want to make sure we hit on the legacy of ancient Greece, the legacy of ancient Rome, because those are important lessons that help the children look at the world around them today and identify the influences in our government today, in our language today, in our architecture today, in our culture today. And then with that, I'm going to take a couple of extra minutes because I know that I probably spoke a little faster than I needed to, which I get really excited about ancient world curriculum. But since I have a few more minutes with you, I want to take you through enhancing the learning because in our curriculum, every lesson has, as you probably are aware, materials that you'll need, the steps you'll take throughout the lesson, how to differentiate the lesson for your students, pacing options, also though enhancing learning. And enhancing learning has a lot of neat components in them. And so I'm going to go into the very first lesson, investigating the past through history. And I'm going to take a moment to go through my top 10 and just show you the enhancing learning that's available in them. Um, Now, literature recommendations. There are a lot of literature recommendations within this curriculum, and I encourage all of you to take them and see what's available at your media center at your school site because TCI recommends a lot of really great books and resources for kids to learn more. This particular lesson um, about investigating history has to do with caves. And because the introduction for this lesson, the kids go into a cave in Lascaux, France, and they find these cave paintings. And so you can learn more about cave archaeology, but also one of the components of this talks about how we still need to preserve our caves for future generations. And that is something in terms of preservation, I'm going to show you as we go forward with the other lessons. TCI has really given us an opportunity to look at the importance of preserving these historical sites. Also, within the enhancing learning, you'll see that there are some teacher inquiry lessons from C3 teachers in here, which are also valuable for us in our classroom. In ancient Sumer, I'm going to take one step back to the rise of Sumerian city-states and go into a couple of the literature recommendations that are in there. But then in ancient Sumer itself, you will see that we can take them into the British Museum and see that they have exhibits on Mesopotamia and they can see some of the artifacts that they saw on the walls of your classrooms. They can see them in more of a 3D version, if you will, through an interactive component of the British Museum. So the kids get to see that not only were you displaying these artifacts on the walls of your classroom for them to evaluate and look for characteristics of civilization, but they are also in the British Museum and they can look at them from that perspective as well. I could go on and on about these different components within each lesson that help our students not just learn about the past, but keep it related to the future. Another way that we can do that within these top 10 lessons are by going into the readings themselves. So I'm going to show you in the ancient Egyptian pharaohs. I'm going to click on the reading and take you in here. And the exploring social sciences in the ancient Egyptian pharaoh takes kids from the BCE time period and what that can look like in today's world. And so this is also another spoiler alert moment for some of us because many of us learned that King Tut was smited. But it looks like using new CT technology, they have found that he had an infection in his leg that actually was probably led to his demise. At any rate, if you were to go into these top 10 lessons and even the other lessons, I would argue, and you look into the readings, we call them reading further, although some of them are exploring, but they're diving deeper into some component of the lesson. They will help children make connections between the ancient world and then the world we're living in today. And this is a perfect example of that. It also, it, kids teenagers, young adolescents, they love to go home and tell their parents something they learned that is different from what their parents' frame of thought is. And so this is a great example of how they can go home and tell their parents how they learned that King Tut actually died. And because their parents were probably taught something different. With that being said, if we continue to go through each of these lessons and we look into the ones that I highlighted for you, with even moving beyond the presentation tools that you have to teach these lessons, you will find lots and lots of resources about these historical topics. Going to move forward into the rise of democracy and show you there is a case study of government in Athens that kids can explore and read more about. And then if I were to go into the lesson overview for Rise of Democracy and go into enhancing learning, you'll see there are again literature recommendations, internet projects, C3 teachers again. We have a lot of C3 teacher resources in our enhancing learning. But these give us opportunities to not just stay within the textbook or the presentation, but to even move beyond. And so our resources, there are so many to choose from. And the best part about it is that you are the expert in your classroom and you get to determine how you bring history alive using TCI and then looking at how this can relate to your students. And we offer a lot of support with that. I'm going to go back into my presentation to take you into our system of support here at TCI. Whoops, I apologize for that. We have professional development in our TCI accounts. So we call that in-app professional development because it's within the application of your TCI digital account. The professional development that we offer ranges from foundations. For those of you who went through the foundations webinar this morning, you can learn even more about how to navigate your resources, how to import grades or grade your students in the grade book. You can learn how to have that interface with the different grading systems that are out there, or platforms rather, that are out there, like Canvas and Schoology. But there are lots of opportunities in our professional development. You also can see past webinars that we've offered in the professional development. We also provide TCI product updates, not just today in the webinar, in the webinars that are offered, but also within your TCI account, you'll see product updates that are there. If you join our TCI Facebook group, I believe Brian Thomas mentioned that earlier this morning when he was speaking with Bert. We also have an Instagram. You can use that QR code to join the Facebook group. The quality of the questions and the support that teachers receive in our TCI Facebook group is incredible. I highly encourage all of you to join us on our socials. The Facebook group itself there are teachers from across the country. They pose questions on how to implement curriculum in their classroom, and the teachers who respond to them are very supportive. And we also have a couple of TCI employees that help to moderate, and a lot of us are members of that and offer our own suggestions on how to implement TCI curriculum in your classroom and how to give ourselves a little grace sometimes. I know sometimes TCI posts some things that are just, we just at the right moment where you just want to be seen and heard, and that you're not alone in getting through the grind of the school year. So with that, I also want to include that if you go to our Teach TCI webpage, we also have resources there that can help you. And they're created by teachers for teachers, so they're pretty intuitive on how to navigate that. What I would like to do next is I want you to reflect in the chat. We still have a few minutes together, and so I want you to think about how you're feeling at this point in how I presented opportunities for you to get the most bang for your buck in the ancient world curriculum this year. And then um, we have a few minutes to even talk about that. If you have any questions that are burning and you would like answered by me or my colleague Julie. That's a great question. There's a question in the chat. Can you use the interactive reading notebook with these lessons? Absolutely. Every single thing I showed you is available digitally and in print, and is also available in Spanish. And then one of our latest releases is that the text can be translated into any language, digitally, of course, but yes, I totally agree. The problem solving group work, it does. And the point that with that is the teacher, you really do become the facilitator, and your job is to walk around and make sure that they are adhering to what their role is, and that their role as a leader at different parts of the activity is being recognized by their peers, which is a very different conversation than trying to motivate children to have somebody lead the that part of an activity. So, oh, I love that you turned a bare classroom into Nicholas into a class full of student work on the walls. TCI does in this ancient world curriculum. There are so many opportunities to even take the processing activity that's in print and how to put that on poster and use it to display in your classroom. There are lots of opportunities to do that. So. Your sixth grade, Jared, there could be a reason for that. It could be that you're working with a different addition or revision for the TCI, book that you're using. And that would explain that. The latest edition added a couple of different chapters, like Ancient Persia is one that was, that added to the third edition. So that could be why. And if your textbook is titled The Medieval World and Beyond, I want you to know that you also have hands-on lessons, and you can use my guidance to help you with the reasoning behind why I chose the lessons that were chosen. Meaning, look through your curriculum in the medieval world. Think critically about what they're learning in each lesson. Look for themes like leadership, cooperation, accomplishment, opportunity cost, and that can help guide you in that. And then also, Mercedes, I want to mention too that that's also why we have a TCI community. You're more than welcome to jump into our Facebook page and ask what other people or what people who work with TCI, what we think for that. Obviously, you're going to stick to your scope and sequence from your district, if if that's your priority. However, we also are here to support you and would be happy to help you identify some lessons in the medieval world that are like absolutely you want to do the hands-on instead of punting to the video activities are great, but instead of just being like, oh, video activity, those you want to say, okay, I'm going to take the top 10 and make sure I block out the time needed for that. Kristen, thank you for that. I've used this program. I've taught middle school for 31 years and sixth grade for several of them. And the program itself is brilliant, intuitive. It really takes kids on a journey of the ancient world. And we want them to grow when they get out of the ancient world journey to take some of those ideas and themes with them to move forward. So. So thank you for that. And yeah, Melody, it is a lot. For those of you who are new to the program, there is a lot in there. And I want to encourage you all to take a deep breath. TCI offers a lot of options for us, and they do that because they care and they want us to be successful. And one option may not fit everyone who's using the program. And so if you look at the top 10 that I have, see what you can do to make sure you take time for the hands-on part of those. If you can't do that for the top 10, make sure you do it for the first one and then the five that I recommended after that that are bolded, because that will give your kids a really strong foundation moving on. And not only that, I realize I talked a lot about a foundation moving on, but it is also imperative for our students to have success now. And I feel like those lessons are scaffolded in the differentiation tools that are available for those lessons that TCI provides will help every student be successful. Um, so make sure if you have needs that are beyond are in the presentation tools and the textbook, that you look at the differentiation tips because they are lesson specific. And even if you need to have a quicker coverage, they give you options to keep it hands-on with quicker coverage ideas. And that I think is really essential.
Amy, we have about 1 minute. I'm going to ask you this question from Mary. She says, for
Okay.
the Roman column activity, would the whole class read the Roman expansions and then go back and complete the Roman column activity so that the
Oh, such a great question. No, they are assigned a specific section. Oh, sorry, my mouse is like getting away from me. One group is assigned a specific period of Roman expansion, and they create their column based on that. And then as students are doing gallery walks about other periods of expansion, they're reading and completing their reading notes. And then they get to graffiti those columns based on who lost out or who was minimalized. And that's being kind because some of the people were actually terrorized and murdered um, during that period of expansion. So they get to take that black marker and graffiti the column in honor of, or to be the voice of, would be more appropriate, those people who were minimalized during that Roman expansion time period. Oh. All right, everybody. Well, we want you to share your fun. And then also, I want to make sure that you know how to get to your next session. So if you will click the link to go back to the session page, then you can join your next session. And I want to thank you so much for being with me. And thank you, Julie, for helping me navigate the chat. And have a wonderful day. Have a great rest of your summer and an exciting 26-27 school year.